All right, hello everybody. My name is Jim Pingle and welcome to our May 2015 Hangout. This month we'll be talking about wireless access points on pfSense. Fun topic, we get asked about it quite a lot. The situation's a bit better now than it has been in the past, so it's a good point to do it. Before we get into that, we got some project notes here. First up, we've got pfSense 2.3 coming along. We're converting from the PBI-based packages to the PKG package style images from FreeBSD, which is what everybody's moving to. It's really slick, and actually we've already got a lot of the back-end work done there, and it's working really well. It's going to be on a FreeBSD 10.2 release base. Right now it's still 10 stable, but hopefully we won't follow too much longer after 10.2 release. We are working on a completely new Bootstrap GUI, which is going to be pretty slick. It's very much a work in progress, but we do have just a brief little show and tell here, just to give you a quick look at a couple of pages. Obviously, there's a lot of styling things that we still need to work out, but a bit of a departure from what we've had before, but it's going to be a lot more standardized and a lot less cobbled together, a little bit more modern looking, work a lot better in a wider range of browsers, things like that. And beyond that, we're also doing Intel Quick Assist for our SG series hardware that you can get from our store. We're targeting that just only on our own hardware because we know it works there. We can assure that it's going to work right. On other hardware, it's less clear. So for the time being, it's just going to be available in the software load that comes from the store, just because we want to minimize the chance it's going to cause problems elsewhere. And it also makes a good value add for our hardware, because it's going to be essentially like a crypto accelerator in addition to AES and I, but it also works with other ciphers and things. It'll work with AES, DES, SHA-D, MD5, so it works with hashing and other things as well, and as well as AES GCM like AES and I. We're targeting that for we hope for a release later this year, maybe in the fall sometime. Our big unit, the SG8860, is now shipping. It's a desktop form factor, as a C2758 processor, 8 cores, 8 gig of RAM, 6 Intel gig ports, 64 gig of onboard storage. The main difference between that and the big C2758, that's the 1U rack mount version, this one is more of a desktop form factor. It's a smaller unit, can be used in a little bit more wider range of places. There will be some rack ears for it, but the bigger one can have 10 gig cards and things expanded into it. This one at the moment, there's no expandability along those lines, but not sure what the future holds there. And then the smaller one of the family, the SG2220, little 2-port guy. It's still coming along, but it won't be around until late July. We do still have a few slots open in our June classes, and we are going to be putting the classes on hold over the summer. There's going to be some revision going on, and just taking a break from it for a bit while we rearrange some things. So if you're looking to get the training anytime in the next few months, you're going to better get into the classes we've got scheduled up now. Otherwise, it might be a bit of a wait before we have more classes. And we're still, as you can see, we're still using Fuse this month, and we're still looking for investigating other options there. All right. So about this Hangout, what we're going to be doing this month, the wireless access point setup, we're just going to focus on pfSense. We're going to be skipping a lot of the details, nitty-gritty stuff, like about signals and antennas and things like that. It's a very, very complicated topic, and we're just going to focus on the pfSense end of things, how it affects us directly. Talk a little bit about multi-BSS, which also known as VAPs, virtual access points. It's a way to have multiple roles on the same card, like multiple SSIDs. Talk about using an external access point, how that figures into pfSense. Talk about how to set up a routed wireless segment, and also a couple different methods of bridged wireless segments. And I'll go over a little bit over rules for isolating the users and controlling how they get to DNS, things like that. And also talk about how to do like wireless status and things. So at the moment, wireless on pfSense is in pretty good shape. It's a lot better than it has been in the past. Uh, the biggest win lately is that we can now do 802.11n. That has not been possible on older versions, but now on certain hardware, especially decent Atheros cards, we can do 802.11n. It works pretty well. We've had pretty good luck getting anywhere between 60 and 100 megabits worth of throughput through it, uh, just in that general range, depending on signal and client placement and everything. It's been pretty good, and it's a heck of a lot better than the support was with G alone. Anyway, there's no what we don't have though. We don't have 802.11 AC. Um, we do have NA, so you can do 5 gigahertz on cards that support it, but we can't do AC yet. And if you want, if you can pick up an 802.11n capable mini PCI kit. It's a mini PCI card or mini PCI Express card. It's also got the pigtails and antennas. It's primarily geared for the systems we sell, the RCC and the SG and the APU type devices. But it could work on anything with a mini PCI Express slot. You can follow that link there and go and find it on the Netgate store. That's about $80, but it's got everything you need all in one package. Just pop the parts in, pop in the pigtails, and screw on the antennas, and off you go. There are quite a few other cards supported. Not just those are the ones we sell. We have a lot of them documented on the wiki and the doc wiki on the forum. There's a spreadsheet on the wiki too that links to that has a good breakdown of the drivers and what they're capable of doing. All that said, primarily it's good for pfSense is good for smaller deployments. More like not I don't want to say Soho, but it just depends on where you're doing it. If your firewall is in a rack with a lot of other gear, you don't want the wireless there. You'd want to push it. You want the signal somewhere central, run a wire, off to some other place. I mean, yeah, you could play tricks with antennas and wiring and other stuff, but 9 times out of 10, it's just easier to get an external access point in cases like that. And you can get gear that has 802.11 AC. You could get gear that has central management. Got an example linked there for the Ubiquiti Unify access points. You can pick up a multi-pack of those things, drop them on a network with a controller, and it's all very seamless and really nice. There's other gear from like Ruckus and Aruba and things like that price varies quite a lot, but you can certainly tie that stuff back into pfSense, which I'll touch on a little bit. But in terms of the actual wireless, it's really up to you. In a lot of deployments, it may make sense to do it that way, or it may make sense to do it in the firewall directly. Depends on what your constraints are. Take it on a case-by-case basis. Now, before we start, you actually configuring the wireless. A couple things you need to plan ahead for. First is the type of deployment you're going to go for. First up is a routed segment where the wireless exists on a separate subnet, separate network, completely isolated, from your LAN. So it's just its own separate interface, and that's the best thing to do. It's the easiest thing to deal with at a technical level, and it's also the least amount of trouble in terms of getting anything to work from the firewall perspective. And then there's 2 different types of bridge segments. You can do just a simple bridge of the LAN to wireless, which it kind of works. There are quite a few issues with it, which I'll get into. It's much better to actually have the bridge interface itself assigned, and you put the IP address and all the other services and things on the bridge rather than the member interfaces. It's a bit more work to get there, but the experience is a lot better. But I'll weigh those out a bit more, pros and cons and things a little bit further along in the presentation. And when you're planning, you need to pick a channel for the wireless to run on. This is as it says here, it's really oversimplified. I'm just trying to get you a general idea. You can use a survey tool like this is Net Surveyor here, or there's Insider, Kismet, things like that are there's countless apps, Android and iOS, that'll do it. Basically, you can see how many access points are running on particular channels, and what their signal levels are like over time. This one is Net Surveyor, but there's a lot of different options out there. Basically, you're just looking to find an open channel somewhere. Although, these days, with 802.11g, you could pretty much be assured that 1, 6, and 11 channels didn't overlap. But with 802.11n and other technologies, and even some of the other ones with turbo modes and other things, that it's just doesn't really hold true that there's no overlap between those channels. So you can sort of generally guide yourself by that, but you might keep in mind that it's not a hard and fast rule like it used to be. A lot of people these days just stick everything on channel 1 and hope for the best, or maybe 11. Or if you've got 5 gigahertz, you can go up a lot higher. And there's some things to be said too. There's a lot of interference in the 2.4 gigahertz range from pretty much anything that's home wireless stuff, like cordless phones and baby monitors and security systems, and even interference from microwaves, stuff like that. In that survey tool, a lot of those, they don't show you interference on things that just aren't computer wireless or that aren't Wi-Fi. You may be able to find a little dongle or something that'll do a little bit better signal analysis, but depending on how much you're actually getting into wireless, might be overkill. So really, what it boils down to, you can try it on channel 1. If it's a little weak, you might try 11. Really, it depends on how busy the whole spectrum is in your area. I'm in a rural area. There's not a whole lot around me, but some people in cities have a lot of interference from all sides to deal with. So just pick a channel, try it out. If it doesn't work, you can always switch. All right, first thing you need to do is assign the interface, which is just like any other interface. You just go up here to Interfaces and Assign. For the first wireless, you do want to make sure you just pick your main wireless card. Like here, this is my primary one, wireless, and it's just ATH0 is what it shows you here. And as you can see here, I've got a VAP for the tech staff, and I've got one that I haven't yet assigned. To assign it, you just pick it from the list here, click plus, and it'll jump up here as an opt interface. And then as you go up here to interfaces, and then it would be an opt interface here. I'm just going to go to this tech staff one because it's got some more complicated stuff on it that's neat to show. Before we go much further into the actual interface configuration, I want to show you over here, since I assigned this first one, if you go over here to the wireless tab, you can see here we have the ability to do multi-BSS or VAPs. And that's, you have multiple roles on one card, and the most common thing you'll see here is multiple SSIDs on the same card. So you have 4 different SSIDs that present as 4 different interfaces. You could have 4 different subnets with 4 different types of security, however you want to do it. Just like on this one here, I've got one that's just a plain WPA2, and I've got one that's 802.11 or 802.1x. And it's however you want to do it. You could have another one with a captive portal, or it gives you a lot more flexibility. Now, in theory, there's no limit on how many VAPs you can have on a card, but practically, there have been limits on the driver to only allow 4 VAPs per card. Some drivers might allow 4 APs, 4 clients. There are other drivers that go for up to like 8 and 32. Some don't really even impose a limit, but you might find that when you go to add another one, that it might panic or crash. So be very careful when you do that if you're going beyond 4. Just test your hardware out, because it varies a lot by hardware. And if you look in the VAPs were patented a while back, and if you look on the patent, I've got a link there, you'll find that our very own Jim Thompson was in on the patent for that, and a few other names you might find familiar. So give that a look. It's a curious little thing. Something else, technically, all VAPs on a given card, they share settings for the radio configuration, especially. The channel, regulatory settings, antenna settings, and the standard, those have to be common between any VAP you set. Other things, as far as your security and SSIDs, things that will vary, but we'll get into that deeper in a moment. Now, to create a VAP, after you've assigned your main one, you just pop over here to interfaces assigned on the wireless tab, and just click plus. Pick the parent interface, pick your mode, type in a description, save it, and then it just shows up as another choice here. Like this one is guest Wi-Fi. And really that's it. Then you can come back over here to interface assignments and assign it, and it's its own separate isolated interface. Really handy. Now let's look at the actual interface configuration. We'll look at this tech staff one again. Obviously, you have to check enable to enable it, give it a description. I called this one tech staff. It's like a technician and staff wireless, or technical staff wireless. I gave it just a static IPv4 address. Although if you're going to bridge, that would actually end up with, it's still left at none here, but this one's going to be on its own subnet, so it's a static IPv4. And I gave it, you see, I gave it its own unique subnet that's separate from everything else. And because it's an internal interface, I did not set a gateway. You wouldn't want to set a gateway unless this were actually like another WAN of sorts. Now here we've got our common wireless settings, and as it mentions here, these apply to all of the VAPs on a given card. So anything that's tied back to ATH0 on this one, the first to Theros card, it's going to be the same. This persist common settings checkbox, what it does is this particular section, the common settings up here, if you have that box checked, then these settings in this area will stick around even if you delete all the VAPs and delete this interface. It'll still be there. So it's really up to you if you want to keep that or not. I don't really care a whole lot. It's not, I don't need these exact settings every single time. So I might, just not, I don't care if it persists. And then if I delete the interface, I just come back and just have to reset it. Next up is your standard, which is just the wireless standard you're going to use here. You can this changes depending on your card and what it supports. So only the standards supported by your card will be shown here. So as you can see, this particular card supports B, G, NG, A, and NA. Most commonly, in this case, you'd have it set to NG for 2.4 gigahertz or NA if you want to go up to 5 gigahertz. This OFDM protection mode, this only matters if you've got a mixed B and G network, which is pretty uncommon these days. If you still have any 11B devices on your network, just take them out and shoot them. They shouldn't be around anymore. So just leave that off. And here's the channel we talked about earlier. Again, channels supported by your card will be populated in here. As you can see, this card supports 11 BGN channels, the traditional 1 through 11, but it also supports A and AN channels up here in the 5 gigahertz spectrum, or end of the spectrum. And for this particular choice, I'm just using channel 1 just to keep it simple. But whatever you do, because this is an access point, never try to leave this on auto if it's an access point. I think our input validation prevents you from doing that now. But if you leave it on auto, there are some cards that will panic if you try to host an access point in auto mode. Just don't do it. Always pick a channel. Even if you're running in client mode, it's still better to pick a channel. Your antenna settings, a lot of cards have multiple antenna connectors, and this lets you, if you can manually assign whichever one is transmit and whichever one is receive. That might matter if you have special antennas or a special configuration, things like that, but most people are just going to leave that set as default. Distance setting, again, is generally going to be left blank. Maybe if you were trying to do sort of a longer distance link, you might want to do that. You pop in the approximate distance to the other end in meters, and it might tune the timers a little bit better if there's a little bit of distance between you. Now here in the regulatory settings, you can leave this set as default if you'd like. I personally like to pick where I'm at. So I'm here in the U.S., so I pick FCC up here, and I pick United States, and then I tell it it's indoors. Different countries and locations have different regulations for how strong your signal can be. If you pick the wrong regulatory domain, in some countries you could actually get in a lot of trouble if you're transmitting on a channel you're not supposed to, or at a power level you're not allowed to. So you might be careful with that. I mean, even in the U.S. you could get in trouble in theory, but the odds of that happening are fairly low. But still better safe than sorry. Make sure you're complying with all your state and local and regional and country laws, whatever you're regulated by. Okay, from here down, under the network-specific wireless configuration and down, these are settings that can differ for each VAP or each wireless interface. So, so anything you have set here is going to be unique for this particular interface, and it can be different from the other VAPs. You got your mode here, which is either access point, ad hoc, which doesn't see a lot of use. There's not really a good use for that on pfSense. I'm not even sure how many drivers actually support that well. 90% of the time you're in access mode, if not more. Infrastructure, BSS, that is client mode if you're looking to use this for like a wireless WAN to hook up to something else or to link into another wireless network. SSID, pretty obvious. It's the access point said, so what the name it broadcasts out for others to connect. Your minimum wireless standard, you can, like, because this one supports N and G, I could force this to N, which would prevent any G clients from connecting to this particular one, which in some cases that makes sense because sometimes an older client can slow down the network in general if it's connected when the faster ones are connected. That was a much larger concern back in the days with 802.11b because B could really drag down a G network. Now, allow intra-BSS communication. That allows the wireless clients to talk to each other. In the case if it's like your general use LAN type network, you might want that on so your wireless clients can see each other. It's really important to have that for some things like wireless printers. So you've got a wireless printer and somebody connected to wireless. Without the setting on, that client can't reach that printer. It's also a big thing with Chromecast and other similar wireless devices that have some sort of wireless configuration component. If it's wireless and you're connected, your two things connected to the same wireless point, if they need to talk to each other, you have to set that option. However, say you're in like a coffee shop or a hotel, airport type environment, you're running an access point for that, you probably don't want your clients to talk to each other and you wouldn't want that set. So all up to your deployment, but you just need to keep that in mind. WME as wireless multimedia extensions, it is quality of service for wireless. 802.11n requires that to be set, so you want to check that. The input validation will flag that if you don't have it set. Hide your SSID, that will stop the card from broadcasting that SSID. Some clients don't support that very well, and it's security by obscurity. It can still get broadcast, especially by some clients. There are ways it can be found out. It's not really good not really perfect security. It might stop some casual observers from finding you, but somebody who's determined is still going to find you. WEP or wired equivalent privacy, it is broken. It is like a screen door on a submarine. It should not be used. It's there for legacy type deployments, especially like 802.11b type things, really old stuff that might require it. You might have like maybe an old Nintendo DS Lite or something that may be hanging out on your network. You could make a very isolated, segmented, locked down network for something like that if you want. But really, if you have something that only supports WEP, it's probably past time to replace it. So again, it's there, but it's something you probably shouldn't use. Now, the next box down, WPA, that's the most common you'll see these days. It's really, you can be WPA or WPA2. WPA2 is more secure. WPA itself on its own isn't really considered all that secure. But you can, check the box for WPA. You can put in a pre-shared key here. This one I just left here as an example, but this particular interface is configured for 802.1x, or what they call WPA2 Enterprise in other terms. So I have this on WPA2. And then my key management mode, if you're using just a plain PSK, you should probably have this on pre-shared key, or you can set it to both. In this case, it's tying back to a Radius server that is also set for Extensible Authentication Protocol, or EAP. So I have this one set for EAP because that's what the Radius server wants. And for authentication, most of the time this is going to be on open system authentication because shared key is really for WEP, and you don't want WEP, so don't do it. For WPA pairwise, you can have it on either AES or TKIP. TKIP, again, is broken. We recommend AES. I would not use TKIP unless you have a client that supports it, but if the client supports TKIP and not AES, again, see above, replacing that old broken client. Now your key rotation and master key regeneration are sort of related. It's how often the crypto keys for the wireless security are changed. They're specified in seconds, and the key rotation, despite this incorrect text here, which we've corrected in the current version, or that's in development, the key rotation should be shorter than the master key regeneration. So as you see here, this is set to an hour. This is set to 1 minute. And you can set these lower if you want, but the lower you go, the more often it rekeys, and there could be potential for disruption. So we'll go from there. I just leave these at the default in most cases. Strict key regeneration, what that does is if it's set, if somebody disassociates it, they leave your network, it forces everybody to rekey right at that moment, which is really good for security. But if you have a lot of churn, a lot of people connecting, disconnecting a lot, it can lead to a lot of rekeys, and it can also cause some disruption there. So if you have a lot of churn, you may not want to check that, but if you don't, it's good to have. Next up is 802.1x. I typo there. I'll get that fixed. 802.1x. It's the most secure option, but it does require a radius server separate from the firewall. You could use the free radius package that we've got, the free radius 2 package, and do it on the firewall, but it can't use the built-in authentication is really what the top one implies. You can actually specify 2 radius servers here in your settings. See, there's spots here. There's the first one and then the second one. And to use it, you just check the box, enter the IP address of your radius server, the port number it runs on for authentication, and the shared secret. The radius server has to be configured to allow clients in. So this radius server needs to have a client entry for this firewall, and you have to have the same shared secret. And it varies a lot from radius server to radius server exactly how you do that. So free radius 2, you just add it as a NAS client. In NPS or something, you'd have to add it as a client there in a slightly different way. And because I've got this set here, again, you make sure if you have your radius server set for EAP, you want to make sure you have this set for EAP up here as well. And then when your client connects, it'll see that it's an 802.1x proper network, and it will prompt you for a username and password and maybe even a mode like PEEP or depending on how you have that set up. All right, we'll talk for a minute about using an external access point and how that would tie into your network. You could either have it either directly on your LAN, or you could hook it up to a separate interface on the firewall and segment it just like you would a wireless interface here. Most wireless routers can be used in this way if you want. If you don't have just a plain access point, you can turn a router into an access point most of the time. It's pretty common to do if you got like WRT or Tomato, something like that on your box. You can pretty easily, even there, you could probably even bridge the WAN to the LAN and just have it be just a plain access point. First thing you do on that wireless router, which I'll just call an app or an AP from here on, give it an address on your LAN, same subnet, just a different address. So like if your firewall is 192.168.1.1, you just give that address like .2 or .5 or something next to it in the same subnet. You'll use that to manage it later on in the same network. Before you hook that up to anything, you want to make sure to turn off DHCP on the access point. That way, DHCP would still come from pfSense or whatever serving it up on your LAN. You don't want it to be conflict. And you want to hook it up to the network using the switch or LAN side of the access point, not the WAN port on those things. If you plug into the WAN port, it's going to want to do NAT on the traffic that passes through, and you do not want that to happen. You want the wireless clients directly on your network, and that's only going to happen if you hook into the back end of that on the LAN, not on the external or WAN or internet port. And as I mentioned here and before, if you got like Tomato or something like that on there, there's usually an option to bridge the WAN into the LAN so it actually doesn't have an internet port on it. Then you can make use of that extra port as another switch port. A lot of people just plug straight into their LAN switch. That way, the firewall doesn't have to know anything about wireless, which is pretty convenient depending on how you want to deploy it. Some people would take that and plug it right into a separate interface on the firewall. If you do that, you can filter it a little bit better, and then you could treat it sort of similar how in a moment here we're going to talk about segmenting off your wireless network. All right, and then if you set it up this way, hooked into the inside, when the wireless clients associate, they'll essentially be bridged through the wireless into the physical network through that access point, which is just what you want. Okay, so before we move along here, we need to pick a network style, and I'm going to go over all of these. The best way is to put the interface on its own separate subnet. That's the preferred method. It's the most reliable, most secure, and technically simplest method. The only downside is that because it's on a separate subnet, you might have trouble with protocols that want to do broadcast or multicast, things like browsing through file shares, doing things like DNLA or MDNS or the way some printers work. It may not like it. But if you do it this way, you won't have any problems if you need to run a proxy or limiters, captive portal, anything else that can have issues with bridging. If you bridge the interface to the LAN, it puts them on a common layer 2, so essentially the same flat network. Conceptually, for people to think of, it's simpler with the wireless being on the same network as your physical or the wired network. For some protocols, like I mentioned with like browsing the network, things like that, it's easier because broadcast and multicast is going to be spread, across, the physical network and the wireless interfaces, which is the point. But you need to be aware of that because it will make, if you have a pretty busy network, it's going to send all that stuff out over wireless and the wired segment of things, so it could end up pretty noisy. But a lot of people choose this just because it's easier for people to think about and work with. But it can give you trouble depending on how you implement it with as flip side there is you may have trouble trying to do a proxy or limiters, captive portal, stuff like that. And you also need to take care with rules because even though they're on the same layer 2, the traffic still passes through the firewall. So you have to account for things that you may not have to account for in other ways. So say you have a rule on one of these interfaces that has a gateway set, you need to remember to pass the traffic into your LAN without a gateway set because otherwise it's going to get shoved out of WAN. So in a multi-WAN scenario, you have a little bit more consideration. And also you need to make sure that DHCP and other protocols are allowed, depending on how you've got your rules set there too. So first up, we're going to talk about wireless on a separate subnet, which I said is the easiest. And sort of we've gone through this a little bit already, having looked at that TechStaff wireless. You sign the interface, you configure it on its own unique subnet. You can set up DHCP on there if you want, which most people do. Configure firewall rules to allow the clients to reach the desired destination. So, pass from that subnet to anywhere. So like if we go to firewall and rules, I'll show you here. On my TechStaff, it's just pass from the TechStaff network out to anywhere. Easy peasy. If you're using manual outbound NAT, you need to make sure that your brand new subnet is also allowed out in the outbound NAT rules, that it has some mapping set up there. If you're on automatic, odds are it's just going to work. You don't have to worry about it. And if you had any other services bound to specific interfaces, like say you've gone through and manually set your DNS server to only be on your LAN, you would have to also then tell it to listen on this other interface as well. Same goes for things like a proxy server, UPnP, captive portal, stuff like that. Any daemons you want to run on that interface would have to be set there. And really, for a separate interface wireless, that's it. That's all you got to do. You add the interface on its own subnet, set up the services, set up the rules, set up the NAT. You're done. And that goes to wireless or wired. That's really all you have to do for any new interface. Now, of the two types of bridging I mentioned before, first up is just a simple bridge. It's really easy, but it's limited in terms of what it can do. You can't do limiters, you can't do capture portal, you can't do a proxy, and it has other issues, which I'll get to some of them here. Basically, all you do is make a bridge where you don't change your LAN stays as it is, you just add a bridge. First you assign the wireless interface, and then you enable it, leave the IP type set to none. You can go into the system tunables if you want, just make sure that you're set to filter on the members and not the bridge. See these guys here, net.link.bridge. There's pfill member, which causes the member interfaces of the bridge to have filter rules. So in this case, this would be your LAN and your wireless interface, since they are the members, and that's set to 1, so the filtering happens there. And this one is set to 0 to filter on the bridge itself, because in this instance, your bridge is not assigned, so it wouldn't have any rules. So this is how you'd want to set it if you were going to just do a simple bridge. And you want to make sure it's set that way before you start, otherwise you can break something. So yeah, you check those out. You have your wireless interface assigned with no IP address, and then you just make a bridge under interfaces, assign, on the bridges tab, and you can just click plus to start a new bridge. I'll just show you the one I've already got here. In this case, I've got a wired LAN and wireless together, and wired LAN 2 all bridged together. And in the simple bridge case, you just have LAN and wireless. And then you want to add some firewall rules to the wireless interface, but say I named this one wireless, but in the firewall rules, there is a macro that would be wireless net. But because this interface does not have an IP address, that macro is undefined. It means nothing. So you cannot use that. You could use LAN net because LAN does have the subnet set, or you could simply use a source of any on the firewall rule to pass out if you want. And here, if you do that, you also have to make sure you have a rule. You could either do a custom rule to pass DHCP, or if you pass from a source of any, it would work. It's a little bit different because DHCP comes from a special address first because it's broadcast and the unit doesn't have an address yet. So you have to pass from a source of all zeros, port 67 to 68, and a destination of all 255s, 67, 68, and that'll let your DHCP traffic pass through. And then you could have a rule above or below that to pass, from your LAN net out to any to get into the internet. And that would get you up with just a very simple bridge if you're okay with the limitations I mentioned before. No limiters, no capture portal, no proxy, and also in this case here, which I'll mention it again, because of the way this bridge is set up, the IP address remains on your LAN interface. If you take down the LAN interface, say you unplug the LAN, the wireless goes down too, because the interface with the IP address is gone. And to get around that, you would use an assign bridge, which is a much better way, and it's the way I've got set up on this other sample router over here. You still end up on a common layer 2, but you don't have any of the limitations I mentioned. You can still use capture portal, limiter, proxy, and other functions. There may still be a couple of quirks with doing it, but you're a lot better off this way. In this scenario, your LAN ends up as bridge 0, and the wired and wireless members end up as separate interfaces. So as you see here, my LAN is bridge 0, and wired LAN 2, and wireless are the members. And if we look at them, just for example, here, it has no IP address, which is just what we want. In this case, the IP address and all the daemons like DHCP are bound to the LAN, which is the bridge itself. And so the IP address is on the bridge, which allows them to function independently. So in this case, you could unplug everything except, the wireless would still work. You could unplug the LAN, and LAN 2 would still, or the wired LAN and wired LAN 2 would still work, and vice versa. No one interface depends on another. And so with everything bound to the bridge, works a lot smoother, but it's a bit tougher to get there configuration-wise, which you'll see here. So first things first, you make sure all your uninvolved member interfaces, like in this case, wired LAN 2 and wireless, you want them assigned, IP type of none. Pretty simple on the interface configuration here, IP types of none. You'd create a bridge like I showed you before, but you do not include the LAN on it yet. So in this case, I would just do wireless alone on the bridge, which you have to be running 222 or later for that to work. Or do wireless plus wired LAN 2 on the bridge, but specifically do not include the LAN yet. And for the filtering tunables, you want to make sure to put some the firewall rules on the bridge member interfaces if you're going to filter on the member interfaces, but we don't really recommend doing that in this scenario. It's better to keep the rules on the bridge in this case. But if you want to still filter on the members, you need to add some rules now. But remember, like before, don't use the wireless net or wired LAN 2 macros, things like that. You could use LAN net, but you're a lot safer and better off using the subnet explicitly or a source of any. But if you're going to be filtering on the bridge instead, go back where I showed you in system tunables and set the member filtering to 0 at this point. So while we're doing this, during the configuration, they're actually both going to be 0 just to be safe. And then next, we'll after we get a little bit further, you'll set that back to the other one, the bridge filtering to 1. All right. Now at this point, if you are making this change from the LAN, you're really better off trying to doing this management from either some other separate uninvolved interface, like if you've got an out-of-band management interface, just a dedicated management interface, or hit it from the LAN, something like that. It's best to do it that way because you're going to get disrupted. However, once we do this reassignment, you should be able to plug into one of the bridge members, like your wired LAN 2, or hook up to wireless and manage it. But it's a bit of a risk. I like to make sure I can manage it some other way before I move on. So after you do that, now that you're ready, if you go up to interfaces and assign, at this point is when you actually change the assignment of LAN to bridge 0. And then when you press save there, your existing LAN port now is doing nothing. It is not assigned anymore. All of your IP addresses, your DHCP, your firewall rules, all that stuff that was on your LAN is now on the bridge itself, which is good. But it means if you were plugged into the LAN, now you need to move. So at this point, once you've saved that, you can your old LAN interface should be available for reassignment, and then you just add that one in, assign it. Then you go up to interfaces, and it'll be another opt interface. Enable it, give it a good name, set the IP type to none, save it, and then go back over here to bridges, edit the bridge, and then add it back into the bridge. So now everybody's happy members of the bridge. They're all together. And now that everybody, if you're going to filter on the member interfaces again, now that you added that new interface, now you have to add the rules to it as well. And then ultimately, if you're going to filter on the bridge, now's the time to go and set the bridge filtering back to 1. So a lot of hoop jumping, a lot of back and forth to get to this point. But you're a lot better off in the long run, so I think it's worth it. But at this point, all the member interfaces are on the bridge. The bridge has all of the rules and daemons and everything else, and you didn't have to manually move any of that stuff. You didn't have to manually move the address. You didn't have to manually go through and move all the rules and manually move the DHCP. It's as difficult as this was, it is still a lot better than going through and trying to assign the bridge to a new interface and then move all that stuff over to the bridge. Okay, a little bit about firewall rules, how we're going to do some isolation, which is back over on this guy. To isolate a segment, you only want to pass what they have to get to, which is a little bit tricky because typically they want to reach the internet, which is a destination of anywhere. So you have to come up with a good compromise, which for me, what I like to do is make an alias. I call it RFC 1918. You could call it private networks, LAN networks, my networks, whatever. And in there, I put 10/8, 172.16/12, and 192.168/16. So all of the just regular private networks. And then what I like to do is, like I did on this interface, I made sure that ping and DNS could reach the firewall from the wireless net to the wireless address. And then I put here just a rule to block them from DHCP, but I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then I have it reject all of the traffic from anywhere on this interface going to a private destination. A little bit different than the block private networks that's on the interfaces menu because that blocks the source, not the destination. So you don't want to do that. But do it this way. I like to use reject better than block because if you use block, the clients are going to time out. And as your local clients, you want to be a little bit nicer to them. If you do reject, they'll get a message right back in their browser. So if they open up a web page, they try to go someplace they can't, they'll immediately get back a message that they couldn't connect. And if you block all of RFC 1918 like I did, you might find that later on down the road, if you add another subnet, you connect to a VPN. Now you don't have to worry about going back and preventing them from accessing all of these things. It's very tempting to just block from wireless to your LAN or block from wireless to your DMZ or whatever you want to block from them to a specific VPN network. But if you do it that way, then you have to go back and maintain that. Anytime you add it in the network, you have to go back and add more rules, which is just a lot more work. You do it this way. You could use an alias. If you have other networks, you can add them to that alias. Really just a matter of how your local networks are. If you've got a local public subnet you want to block them to, drop that in the same alias, and off they go. And then down at the end here, now that they're allowed, or we just had a rule to allow them out from this network to the internet so they can get out. You could even add a gateway on that to force it out the WAN. That way they have no chance to try to get to something local. Some people are very tempted here to combine this into one rule and just pass to anything that's not this, which does work fine, but at least for me, logically and visually, it's easier to see this and know that, okay, they can't get there and then they can get anywhere else. But if you prefer, you could combine those into one rule and just say pass from wireless net to not RFC 1918, and that would work. You could put a reject rule with a destination of any underneath that if you want, or just allow them to time out. All a matter of preference. This is just the way I like to do it. All right, a little bit about capturing DNS and limiting DNS. Like you see here, you can either limit them or you can capture them. Limiting would just, what I mean by that is just like I've done here, they can reach my firewall's wireless address for DNS, which is what they get handed by DHCP. If they try to go to any other DNS server, they get rejected. They can't go there. So if they have hard-coded DNS, they can't go, they're going to get nothing, no DNS back. And the other tactic is capturing, which requires a port forward and a little trickery. If you go up here to NAT, which is what I've done on my external app interface here, I added a port forward on the internal interface itself, which this is this app interface here. Protocol TCP UDP, source of any, but you could have it be that subnet. Destination is not the address of their interface, so that allows them to still reach the firewall. Destination port 53 for DNS, NATs to localhost port 53. Now, if you go to the rules over here on my external access point, they can get, I have it listed though, they can get anywhere for DNS, but because of the port forward, how that works, say they've got Google Public DNS 8888 hard-coded on their machine for DNS. If they try to go there, now they are actually going to get DNS from the firewall instead, and they're none the wiser. So if they attempt to use some other external DNS server, they're going to end up using your firewall for DNS, unbeknownst to them. A good use case for this that's not, I mean, it's good for people who have static hard-coded settings. You don't want them to use those. If you want to be more strict about it, it's also good for devices that have unchangeable DNS servers, like the Chromecast I mentioned earlier. Chromecast comes hard-coded using Google's DNS servers. If you don't want to use those, or if you want to do something else, you can use this trick to capture that DNS traffic and put it to the DNS server of your choice. And the client's none the wiser. I suppose that could break DNSSEC, but that's not something we're touching on here. In cases like this, odds are your clients aren't going to know or do much for that, but over time that might change. But for now, you're essentially performing a man in the middle on their DNS, just like you could be doing with some other type of proxy. But in this case, it might be a smoother experience for the users for the time being. Now, a little bit more here. Look at if you want to see the status of your wireless, you just pop up here to the status menu and go down to wireless. Now, for starters, this list up here is going to be empty. But if you click rescan, it'll show you a list of all the nearby access points. And shows their capabilities. And on the doc wiki at this article here, I've got a listing of what all these capabilities mean. Like HTCAP means it's 802.11n, WME means it's got quality of service, ATH means it's got a vendor extensions on, WPS means it supports it's got a WPS button for easy client setup, and there's some other flags and things. They're all explained on the wiki. And like the client flags are also explained there. A means they're associated or they're authorized. Q is quality of service, and there's some others you'll see there, like there's an H if they're on high throughput, which is the 802.11n type things. I'll show you over here. Status wireless. I've got another guy over here. You can see he's on 802.11n. Obviously, he's up high. A is associated. Q means there's QoS. E, I think, is EPS, which is, it's an enhanced rate, which means G, you're faster. P is it's currently in power save mode, and it's on from there. It's all in the wiki. Now, if we go to our wireless status, status and system logs. If you're here under the general tab, and then you go over here to wireless, this is where all of the wireless activity is going to be logged. Where when people associate and disassociate, it's all going to be listed here. It's very chatty, which is why it's in its own tab. Any rekeying, things like that, it's all lands here. You might see anything like an error or a stuck beacon or something over on the general tab, but generally speaking, most of the stuff, at least the interesting stuff, is going to be here on the wireless tab. All right, that's really all there is to it. I don't know if anybody's got any questions or anything they might be interested in knowing. Now's the time to ask. You can just type away. It's really a lot easier now than it was in the past, and not just with creating the bridge and doing all that stuff. It's also better, in terms of the interface assignments are a lot safer, and the wireless drivers are a lot more stable, though there are still some drivers that have issues. Like I've got a Buffalo wireless dongle that I picked up. It works fine on FreeBSD, but for whatever reason it crashes on pfSense, and you got to be careful. You really, even if you buy a card that says it's supported, like somebody says, oh, hey, I got this brand name card, when you buy that, it may be a different revision that doesn't have the same chipset, and you may end up with something that doesn't work. That's why it's really good, especially on places like Newegg or Amazon in the reviews. Sometimes you'll find that even if it doesn't say it in the specifications, somebody might have been so kind as to actually list the chipset in the reviews. Really good bonus points for them if they listed the hardware revision and everything else along with that. So you can at least be a little bit more assured that you're getting something that might work. The hardest thing of all this is probably going to end up being finding the right hardware that's going to work in the right mode and everything else. Because you might find like Intel cards and things like that they have no support for access point mode, but they work fine as clients. Or you might find some things that are a little bit awkward, like VAPs may not be supported on one card, but you may have an Atheros or a Marvell card that could have 32 VAPs on it. You just don't know until you actually get in there and try it out, which is why if you really don't know, if you've got mini PCIe, it's a great choice to go and just buy the one off the Netgate store, because it's the one we sell, because it's the one that we know works. We found one that works. It's a good card. It's got a nice radio. It does N and up in 2.4 or 5 gigahertz, and really a good chip and a really good card, and save you a lot of time and trouble if you can use that one. And I will tell you, when I was been prepping for this hangout, I was digging and digging trying to find a USB one that I knew would work, and I went and got that Buffalo one because people had said it worked on FreeBSD, and then I was hoping to demo that as a client, and that didn't work out. I've got it working on FreeBSD as a client, and it's actually associated with this Scarlet access point over here. It's associated over here as the nice Buffalo card I've got, but it only works on FreeBSD and not us. All right. So, any questions or comments or anything anybody wants to type away? Now's the time to do it. Otherwise, we'll wrap up. Oh, you want to see more of the new interface. I don't know if it's quite ready for that. I don't have the list right up in front of me of which pages are there and which ones aren't. And there's a lot of the styling and stuff that's still left to do. It's more, at the moment, the work that's going on is more about getting all of the content into the new format, and then doing things like making it prettier are coming along as that work progresses too. So the Bootstrap stuff started as a community effort, and actually now we have one of our full-time employees working on it as well. So our repo for that is a bit ahead of the quote-unquote official Bootstrap pfSense GUI one. So we're waiting for some of our stuff to get pulled back into that, and then we need to get everything merged back up to master too. And but it's coming along. But I hesitate to show any more of it just because it's raw. We need to work on it some more. But if you want to take a quick peek at the dashboard, just a few of the widgets and things. And again, not all of this is final. It's just how some of it's going to look, at least for now. You can see there's a lot more of the. I think all the widgets are actually open. I'm not sure if the hiding the other widgets is how all that stuff is working out just yet. You can see like some pages are really nice. The other ones are a little off. If we look at our firewall rules, that one's, I don't know if these are going to get back to being buttons or if they're going to stay the links, but there you go. If we see how it actually does dynamically resize, it's not locked to one width. Still have our mass options there. And see, some of these are really pretty and other ones not so much because they haven't been hit yet. All right, anybody else? Dual band, ooh, that's a good one. At the moment, I don't know of any cards that have two radios on them to do. If you had two separate cards of the same type, and like say you had two mini PCIe ports, two cards that that like the same card that I've got that does both either G or A spectrum, like 2.4 or 5. You could have one on one side and one on the other, but that's really not dual band per se, because you really need two radios. And I don't know of any cards that we actually have that have two radios that are working with both radios. Um, I I can't. I'd have to go and look at it. I think that was on the roadmap, the stuff that Adrian Chad, the wireless guru of FreeBSD. I think that's something he's working on, but I'm not aware of any support for that that's actually working at the moment. Um, I'd be happy to eat my words if somebody knows of some hardware, and I just don't know about it yet. Anybody else? Anything? Anything at all? Drink here. Okay, well, I guess I'll wrap it up. Um, if you have any other questions, anything, so you can always put a post up on the forum or shoot us an email if you've got support. Quick questions. Not gonna hurt much. It's normal to have lower. That's not really getting into the signal levels, anything like that. Really, a lot of that. There's far too many variables there. It depends a lot on your antennas and distance and everything else. And it also gets confusing when you talk about signal noise ratios because some of that's lower the better. So that's maybe some other time we might have somebody do a lot more complicated and involved with the signal side of things on wireless. But if we do that, maybe a bit in the future. All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up for this month. Next month, I'm leaning towards doing a presentation on CARP for next month. So failover type thing for high availability. And that'll be a good one. Or there's several other choices that we're thinking of. So if you have any input on that, drop us a line, comment on the blog post about that, or drop us a note in the forum, anything like that. Just give us any suggestions you've got. We have a nice long list of topics that could be for hangout topics for the future. But we're always interested in what people want to hear. So on that, I think we'll leave you for the month. Thank you all for attending. And this presentation, the recording, and the slides will be up for download sometime later this afternoon. Thank you.